The text came through at 7:43 on a Tuesday night, while my father was sliding a thick envelope across his dining room table like it was a birthday card. "Don't sign anything, get out of there, I can explain everything, but not tonight and not in that house." I didn't recognize the number. I didn't recognize the envelope either, not exactly, but 22 years of practicing state law had trained my brain to react to certain shapes and sizes the way a bloodhound reacts to a scent. That envelope was the wrong weight for a birthday card, too heavy, too official. "My name is Joanna. I'm 36 years old, and I spend my days drafting wills, transferring property deeds, and making sure my clients' assets go exactly where their families intended. I've seen every trick in the book: forged signatures, manipulated beneficiary designations, fraudulent trustee transfers. I've testified against attorneys who stole from their own clients' estates. I know what financial exploitation looks like when it's dressed up in legal language. I just never expected to find it in my father's dining room in Naperville, Illinois." Before I get into what was inside that envelope, let me tell you something about my family. If you've ever sat at a dinner table where you felt like the wrong person had shown up, you'll understand what that house felt like. My father, Lawrence, remarried when I was 9 years old, 2 years after my mother died of pancreatic cancer. His new wife, Elaine, arrived with a daughter from her first marriage, a girl named Piper who was 3 years younger than me and had never in her life been told no about anything. I tried. For 4 years, I genuinely tried to make it work. I set the table without being asked. I helped Piper with her homework. I went quiet when Elaine made comments about how I had my mother's difficult personality. But when I was 13, a small kitchen fire broke out while Lawrence and Elaine were at a charity gala. Nobody was hurt. The fire marshal's report said it started from a faulty wire behind the stove. Elaine told my father I'd started it on purpose. I want to say plainly, I did not, but I spent years being told I was exactly the kind of person who would. She said I was unstable, dangerous, that the loss of my mother had created behavioral issues that required professional intervention. Within 6 weeks of that fire, I was enrolled at a residential therapeutic boarding school in rural Wisconsin, 3 hours from home and worlds away from everything I knew. I spent 4 years there. Piper got my bedroom. I put myself through college on scholarships and waitressing money. I got my law degree from DePaul on student loans I finished paying off last year. I built my own life in a 1-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park, and I learned a long time ago not to expect anything from Lawrence or Elaine except occasional guilt trip invitations to family dinners where I felt like a houseplant someone had forgotten to return. This particular dinner had been Lawrence's idea. He'd called 2 weeks earlier, sounding unusually warm, said he wanted to reconnect, said Elaine and Piper would both be there and that it would mean a lot if I came. I said yes because part of me, the part that will never entirely stop being 13 years old, still wanted him to be the father I remembered before Elaine arrived. I should have known better. The envelope appeared between the salad and the main course. Lawrence slid it across the table with the smooth, practiced calm of someone who had rehearsed this moment 100 times. "Since we're all together," he said, "there's a small piece of housekeeping we should handle. It's just a quitclaim deed, routine estate administration. Your mother's name is still attached to an old property record from before we were married, and my accountant needs it cleared before the end of the fiscal year." He uncapped a pen and set it on top of the envelope. I looked at the envelope, I looked at the pen, I put the pen back down. "Can I read it first?" Elaine sighed with the full theatrical force of a woman who considers patience a personal insult. "It's 1 page, Joanna, it's a technicality. Your father didn't have to include you in this. He's trying to involve you in family business." Piper was on her phone across the table. She didn't even glance up. "She's going to make it a whole thing. She always makes everything a whole thing." I pulled the document out of the envelope. It was not 1 page, it was 7, and it was not a routine quitclaim deed. I recognized the format immediately. I had drafted versions of this exact instrument dozens of times for clients. What I was holding was a full deed transfer, a legal document that would convey any and all interest I held in a specific parcel of real property to a limited liability company called Northfield Capital Holdings LLC. I had never heard of that LLC. I had never heard of the property address listed in the legal description, but paragraph 3 told me enough. It was a commercial building, mixed use, located on North Michigan Avenue in Chicago. Something cold started moving through my chest. Dad, I said, keeping my voice level. This isn't a quitclaim for a property record. This is a full ownership transfer. What is Northfield Capital Holdings? The temperature at the table changed in a way I felt before I saw. Lawrence's warm dinner host expression didn't disappear. It reorganized into something older and harder underneath. Elaine stopped sighing and went very still. Piper set her phone face down on the table. My accountant structured the LLC for tax purposes, Lawrence said. It's a formality. The property's been in my portfolio for years. I just need your signature to clear a clerical issue with the title company. My signature implies I have an ownership interest. If it's already in your portfolio, why does my signature matter at all? Joanna. His voice carried the practiced authority of someone who had used that tone for decades to end conversations. I drove up from Florida for this dinner. I am asking you, as your father, to sign a document so we can have a pleasant evening. That is all I am asking. My phone was face down beside my plate. I remembered the buzz from earlier and hadn't checked it yet. I stood up. I need to use the restroom. Piper made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a groan. I walked out of the dining room at a normal pace, turned down the hallway, and locked myself in the half-bath near the laundry room. I turned on the faucet. I looked at my phone. Don't sign anything. Get out of there. I can explain everything, but not tonight and not in that house. I typed back, who is this? 3 dots appeared. Then, Devin, meet me tomorrow morning. There's something you need to see about your mother's building. Your mother's building. I read those 3 words 4 times. My mother had been dead for 27 years. She had owned a small alteration shop in Wicker Park when she was alive. She had not, as far as I had ever been told, owned anything on North Michigan Avenue. I splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment. Then I walked back into the dining room, sat down, and finished my dinner. I need to look at this with fresh eyes tomorrow, I told Lawrence. It's not a simple document, and I won't sign something I haven't fully reviewed. That's not stubbornness. That's how I practice law. He looked at me the way he had looked at me the night before they sent me to Wisconsin. Like I was a problem that had refused to solve itself on schedule. Fine, he said. I drove home. I did not sleep. Devin is Piper's husband. They've been married 6 years, a quiet, methodical CPA with his own firm in Schaumburg, the sort of steady person who seems like the wrong fit for someone like Piper until you realize he probably believed he could bring calm to the chaos. I'd always gotten along with him in the polite peripheral way you manage with in-laws you see 3 times a year. He seemed decent. I'd never had particular reason to think about him beyond that. We met at a coffee shop in Oak Park at 8 the next morning. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in the back corner with his laptop open, and a look on his face I recognized from clients who had just found out their parents' estate was not what they believed it to be. He turned the laptop screen toward me before I'd even sat down. 3 weeks ago, he said quietly, Piper asked me to help her father prepare the financial package for a building sale. He said it was commercial property he'd been leasing for years and wanted to liquidate before retirement. He said it was straightforward, so I pulled the records. He pointed to the screen, the Cook County Assessor's database, an address on North Michigan Avenue, current assessed value $9.4 million, last recorded sale, never transferred. The ownership history went back to 1993 when it was purchased by a single buyer. My mother's name. I sat down slowly. She bought it the year before you were born, Devin said. Mixed-use commercial, 2 rental apartments above, a long-term anchor tenant on the ground floor. She had been saving for years. When she died without a will, she had filed a beneficiary designation with the county recorder's office listing you as her sole heir. The building passed to you by operation of law. Legally, it has always been yours. Then, how has my father been collecting the rent for 23 years? Devin pulled up another document, a conservatorship filing from Cook County Probate Court, dated 4 months after I was sent to Wisconsin. Lawrence had petitioned the court to manage my financial affairs on the grounds that I was a minor with a documented history of dangerous behavioral episodes, citing the fire, and was currently enrolled in a long-term residential treatment program. The court appointed him as conservator with full authority over any assets in my name. He sent you away, I said, so he could file the paperwork without you present to contest it. And once you turned 18, the conservatorship should have terminated automatically, unless... He renewed it. I was already scanning the subsequent filings. Every 3 years, like a clock, Lawrence had petitioned for an extension, each time attaching fabricated psychological evaluations describing me as financially incapable, emotionally volatile, prone to impulsive and destructive behavior. Each evaluation signed by the same consulting psychiatrist. I had never met that psychiatrist. I had never been evaluated by anyone after I left Wisconsin. He's been depositing the building's rental income into a property management account he controls, Devin continued. Over 23 years at current lease rates, I ran the numbers, Joanna. He's collected somewhere between $4 and $5 million in rent that legally belonged to you. The anchor tenant's lease is expiring now, and he has a buyer offering $9.4 million for the whole building. He needs your signature to clear the title before closing. Northfield Capital Holdings LLC, the buyer, or more precisely Lawrence's own shell company. He wasn't selling the building to a third party. He was transferring my asset into his own entity so he could close the transaction without my name appearing anywhere on the deed. I sat quietly for a moment. Outside, a woman walked past the window with a stroller. Someone's espresso machine ran and stopped. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Devin closed the laptop. 3 months ago, Piper told me she needed to transfer $60,000 from our joint savings to cover a business expense she couldn't discuss yet. I trusted her. That was my mistake. He looked out the window. "Last week, I found the wire transfer records. She sent the money to a LLC that paid the attorney who filed the most recent conservatorship extension on your father's behalf. She knew Joanna. She's known for at least a year." He reached into his jacket and set a business card on the table. "Special Agent Dana Merritt, FBI Financial Crimes Division." "I called them yesterday," he said. "She's expecting us at 11. I will not pretend I processed all of it cleanly. Understanding the legal mechanics of something and absorbing the human reality of it are not the same experience. My mother had spent her life building something for me. She had bought that building at 28 years old, scraped together a down payment, believed in a neighborhood before it was worth believing in. She died before she could watch it appreciate, before she could watch me do anything, and the man she had trusted to raise me had spent the next 2 decades cashing her checks. I sat in Agent Merritt's office in the Chicago field office and allowed myself exactly 4 minutes to feel the full weight of that. Then I became an attorney, because that was what the situation required. Agent Merritt was direct. The financial fraud case was strong. Devin had brought 3 years of bank records, the conservatorship filings, and the shell company documentation. The fabricated psychiatric evaluations were potentially criminal on their own. The psychiatrist who signed them had surrendered his license in 2019 for unrelated insurance fraud, which made the falsified records straightforward to expose. But if Lawrence sensed the investigation coming, he would trigger the sale. The closing was 11 days away. If he transferred that building before the federal freeze could be executed, the money would move through a cascade of accounts and become exponentially harder to recover. We needed him to believe everything was proceeding on schedule. I called Lawrence the next morning. I told him I'd reviewed the document and had a few minor clarifying questions, but I was prepared to cooperate. I kept my voice slightly uncertain, slightly conciliatory, the tone of a woman who had considered fighting and decided it wasn't worth the energy. He was warm immediately, expansive. He told me I was doing the right thing. That night I sat at my kitchen table with the U.S. Attorney's Office contact and helped map the paper trail. Every rental deposit, every conservatorship renewal, every fraudulent evaluation. Devin had reconstructed 15 years of records from Lawrence's property management accounts. The pattern was relentless. Rental income in from the Michigan Avenue tenants, money out to Lawrence's personal accounts, categorized as management fees and maintenance costs that never corresponded to any documented work. Piper's $60,000 wire was there too. Routed through a Delaware consulting LLC she had created specifically to pay the attorney who filed the final conservatorship renewal. She hadn't just known. She had funded it with her husband's money, money Devin had earned from his own clients, saved for their shared future, and used it to keep me legally locked out of my own property. Devin sat across from me during that meeting and didn't say anything about it. He didn't need to. The closing was scheduled for a Friday afternoon at a title company in the Loop. The plan was straightforward. I would appear cooperative and prepared to sign. Agent Merritt's team would be positioned outside. The moment the notary stamped the document, the moment Lawrence believed the transaction was secured, they would move. I was not going to sign that deed, but Lawrence needed to believe I had. The U.S. Attorney's Office had prepared a second document, visually identical to the deed transfer. Same formatting, same cover page, same notary block, same blue exhibit tabs, but the interior language was an emergency asset preservation order, authorizing a federal freeze on all accounts and entities associated with Northfield Capital Holdings LLC, signed by me as the legal property owner. Once notarized, it would allow the FBI to act immediately, bypassing the civil court timeline because the conservatorship fraud had involved federal wire transfers, which placed it under federal jurisdiction. I needed 4 or 5 seconds in which to swap one document for the other before the notary stamped it. Devin gave them to me. He told Piper he was willing to talk, that he needed a conversation before they went any further down the path toward lawyers. She agreed immediately. She always did when she thought she was winning. He arranged to meet her at a cafe 2 blocks from the title company an hour before the closing. What Piper didn't know was that Devin was going to tell her, calmly and precisely, that he had found the wire transfer records, that he knew about the conservatorship, that he had spent the past 3 weeks with the FBI. Piper would panic. She would call her father. Lawrence would receive that call while already seated across a conference table from me, already believing he was moments away from the largest transaction of his life. And in the break in his attention, I would make the swap. The title company was on the 14th floor of a building on West Madison Street. I arrived 5 minutes early in a navy blazer and dark slacks. Lawrence was already there, seated at the head of the conference table, his attorney beside him. He looked at me when I walked in and smiled like we were about to close on a property he was generously gifting me. The notary, a tired-looking man named Mr. Estrada, was arranging his stamp and ink pad at the far end of the table. The deed transfer sat centered in front of my empty chair, a blue pen resting beside it. I sat down. I set my bag on the floor next to my feet. The asset preservation order was folded inside a legal sleeve in the bag's exterior pocket, a replica cover page facing outward, indistinguishable from the deed transfer at a glance. We made small talk for 4 minutes. Lawrence told me he was proud of how far I'd come on my own. His attorney shuffled papers. Mr. Estrada uncapped his stamp. Lawrence's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen, buzzed again. He picked it up, read something, and the expression on his face shifted, just slightly, just enough. He murmured something to his attorney and pushed back from the table. "Excuse me one moment." He stepped into the hallway. I watched Mr. Estrada. The instant Lawrence cleared the doorway, the notary turned toward his briefcase to retrieve a secondary ink pad. Lawrence's attorney was reading something on his own phone. I slid the deed transfer toward me, lifted the cover page, and in the same motion placed the asset preservation order beneath it, the cover pages flush and aligned. I positioned my pen over the signature line, which now, on the interior pages, authorized a federal asset freeze and signed my full legal name in clear, permanent ink. I set the pen down and slid the document back to center. Lawrence returned 40 seconds later. His jaw was tight. Whatever Piper had told him had landed exactly as we needed it to. "Ready," he said, looking at me. "Whenever you are." Mr. Estrada stepped forward, reviewed the document, confirmed my signature on the cover page, and pressed his stamp down on the notary block. "Done." Lawrence's attorney placed the document into a folder. Lawrence looked at me with a relief so genuine it was almost sorrowful. The relief of a man who believed he had just secured $9.4 million and the clean end of a very long lie. He reached across the table and put his hand over mine. "I knew you'd come around eventually." I looked at him and thought about my mother at 28, sitting in an attorney's office not unlike mine, signing the original purchase papers for that building, believing she was securing her daughter's future. "I'm sure you did," I said. We stood, we shook hands. I walked to the elevator, rode down alone, stepped out into the gray October afternoon and buttoned my coat. 30 seconds later, 2 unmarked SUVs pulled up to the building's entrance. Agent Merritt stepped out of the first one. I nodded. She went inside. I didn't watch them arrest him. I had done what I needed to do, and I didn't need a front row seat to the rest of it. I walked to my car, drove back to Lincoln Park, and sat on my couch with a cup of tea and my phone face up on the cushion beside me. The calls started within the hour. Lawrence twice, then his attorney, then Elaine, then a number I didn't recognize. I let all of them go to voicemail. Piper called once. I stared at her name on the screen. I let that one go too. The federal asset freeze hit every account tied to Northfield Capital Holdings LLC within 24 hours of the signed preservation order landing at the Bureau. Lawrence's personal accounts followed when the wire fraud charges were formally filed the following Monday. Elaine's wealth management portfolio was frozen 2 days after that, when investigators confirmed she had been listed as a co-beneficiary of the building's rental income since 2004. The fabricated psychiatric records unraveled fastest. The doctor who had signed all 6 of my fraudulent psychological evaluations had surrendered his license 3 years earlier for insurance fraud. A forensic document examiner confirmed within a week that at least 2 of the evaluations had been backdated. Lawrence's attorney tried to argue that conservatorship had been maintained with proper court oversight. Agent Merritt presented records showing the court-appointed guardian ad litem, who had approved each renewal, had received consulting payments from one of Lawrence's property management entities, 3 payments over 12 years. Quiet enough to miss if you weren't looking, damning when you were. The conservatorship was vacated by court order on a Thursday afternoon. I was at my desk reviewing a client's estate plan when my phone rang with the news. I put it down and sat quietly for a few minutes, looking out my window at the building across the street. Piper was not immediately arrested. Her attorney argued she had transferred funds at her father's direction without understanding their full purpose. I didn't believe it, but federal prosecutors had larger priorities and allowed her to cooperate in exchange for testimony. She and Devin filed for divorce the same week. He received primary custody of their daughter. I attended that hearing as a document witness and sat 2 rows behind him throughout. Afterward, we had coffee. He looked like a man who had set down something very heavy and was still recalibrating how to walk. "Thank you," I told him. He shook his head. "She used money I'd set aside for our daughter's future to keep you from yours," he said. "I would have found out eventually. I'm glad you were the one who answered when I called." The building sold 8 months later through a legitimate process supervised by the probate court. The proceeds, $9.6 million by the time the market adjusted, were deposited into a trust account in my name. After the court deducted legal fees and back taxes, Lawrence's sentencing agreement required him to pay restitution of $3.2 million from his remaining unfrozen assets. He and Elaine pleaded guilty to conservatorship fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial exploitation of a dependent adult. Lawrence received 8 years in federal prison. Elaine received 4, with conditions that barred her permanently from serving in any fiduciary or financial capacity. I did not attend their sentencing. I had a client meeting that morning, a woman whose mother had just passed, who needed help ensuring her estate was protected and that everything her mother had worked to build would reach exactly the people it was meant to reach. I keep a photograph of my mother on my desk now. She's in her early 30s in it, standing outside the alterations shop in Wicker Park, squinting slightly into the sun. She looks proud. She looks like someone who believes what she's building is going to last. I look at it on the hard days. And there are still hard days, because 8 years in a federal facility is not the same as 23 years of stolen rent, and no court order gives back the specific years you spent wondering why your own father never once came to visit you in Wisconsin. But I look at it and I remember what she understood, and what Lawrence never did. That money built honestly, for the right reasons, outlasts the people who try to take it. It just needs someone, eventually, to find the paper trail and follow it all the way home. I'm that person now. I always was. I just needed someone to hand me the file.